WTF happened in 1971. 1. The year the world changed, unveiling the hidden turning point of modern economics. Imagine for a moment that you could stand outside the flow of time and observe the pulse of the global economy as a living, breathing organism. You'd see its rhythms rise and fall with the decades, booms of innovation, contractions of crisis, bursts of consumer confidence. Yet if you looked closely, there is a peculiar disturbance, a subtle yet profound shift that starts to emerge not gradually, but almost as if a switch was flipped. This isn't about market cycles or technological disruption. It is something deeper, woven into the very fabric of how wealth is created, distributed, and held. Over the last 50 years, wages have quietly decoupled from productivity. Though we are working harder and creating more than ever, the rewards of this labor flow elsewhere. The modest home, once the foundation of middle-class stability, has transformed into a speculative asset, priced beyond the reach of many. Personal savings, once a cornerstone of financial security, have dwindled alarmingly, while the cost of everyday necessities stealthily outpaces the average income. The financial sector, a former servant of the real economy, has ballooned into its master, wielding unparalleled influence. Global debt spirals upward, shadowing every future ambition with the weight of past obligations. Economic inequality now stretches to medieval proportions, with America's top 0.1% commanding more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. In this rarefied atmosphere of extreme affluence, figures like Elon Musk eclipse the legendary fortunes of the past, even surpassing the towering wealth of John D. Rockefeller in his prime, though Rockefeller's dominance spanned a longer era. At first glance, these may seem like disconnected symptoms of modern capitalism, but there is a hidden thread linking them, a common moment in history where the rules of the game quietly shifted. And if you trace this thread back through the dense weave of economic data, you will find it invariably leads to one pivotal year, 1971. The question that demands an answer is not simply what happened, but why it changed everything. The hidden shift that reshaped the global economy forever. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the flow of human history, not in static images of wars, kings, or revolutions, but in the subtle, constant current of money, trade, and value. Picture this invisible river that connects every nation, every citizen, every transaction. Now imagine that one day, this river is quietly diverted. No sirens sound, no armies march, but the consequences ripple outward, transforming the world we know in ways most people will never consciously understand. On the surface, life continues, but beneath, tectonic plates of economic power shift. The year is 1971, a year many historians of money now regard as the true dawn of the modern financial era. But why? To answer that, you must first understand that for most of recorded history, money was not merely a number in a bank ledger or a piece of colorful paper. It was a promise, often backed by something tangible, most commonly gold. This linkage provided a psychological anchor for societies. People trusted their money because they trusted the gold it represented. For centuries, this belief shaped commerce and underpinned international trade. After the catastrophic upheavals of the Second World War, global leaders sought stability. They convened in a secluded corner of New Hampshire at the famed Bretton Woods Conference, a historic gathering where 44 nations forged a new monetary order designed to prevent another Great Depression and encourage peaceful global trade. The system they created was elegant in its simplicity. Major currencies would peg their value to the US dollar, and the US dollar would, in turn, be pegged to gold at a fixed rate. This gold-backed dollar became the world's reserve currency. At the time, the United States stood astride the world economically, its gold reserves immense, its industrial capacity unmatched. The system worked, and for a time, it ushered in an era of unprecedented economic expansion, often called the Golden Age of capitalism. Wages rose in tandem with productivity. A single income could afford a home, a car, and a stable future. The American dream felt tangible, yet beneath the surface, cracks began to form. America's economic power was not infinite, and maintaining this gold dollar link required discipline. Governments around the world accumulated US dollars as their foreign exchange reserves, trusting in the promise that they could convert them into gold if needed. But America soon found itself tempted by the privileges of its monetary position. While other nations had to balance their books, the US could simply print more dollars, secure in the knowledge that global demand would absorb them. The temptation proved irresistible, especially as the costs of the Vietnam War and expansive domestic programs ballooned America's budget deficits. Meanwhile, European nations, particularly France, grew increasingly wary. French President Charles de Gaulle decried the exorbitant privilege the US enjoyed, effectively exchanging cheap paper for real goods. France began demanding gold for its dollars, even sending a warship to New York Harbor to collect it. As more nations followed suit, the US gold reserves dwindled dangerously. By the early 1970s, the strain on the system was palpable. In response, on August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon addressed the nation. In a televised speech that would become infamous among monetary historians, he announced the temporary suspension of dollar convertibility into gold. The gold window was closed. Nixon framed it as a necessary move to defend the dollar from international speculators. But it was, in truth, the quiet death of the Bretton Woods system. The suspension, though billed as temporary, was never reversed. With that one decision, the global financial order was irrevocably altered. For the first time, the world operated on a purely fiat currency system, money unbacked by any physical commodity, existing solely by government decree and collective faith. The implications of this shift were enormous. Without the discipline imposed by gold convertibility, governments gained unprecedented freedom to expand the money supply. This newfound flexibility allowed for greater fiscal and monetary interventions, but it also laid the groundwork for inflationary pressures and asset bubbles. Over time, the link between worker productivity and wages, once tightly coupled, began to fray. Financial markets, no longer constrained by the limitations of a gold-backed currency, grew explosively in size and complexity. The financial sector transformed from a servant of the real economy into its master. Debt levels, corporate, governmental, personal, rose to heights that would have been unthinkable under a gold standard. Housing, once a utilitarian good, became a speculative asset class, fueling both booms and busts. Inequality surged as financialization disproportionately benefited those with access to capital. The psychological shift was just as profound. Money, no longer tethered to a tangible anchor, became an abstraction. Central banks, particularly the Federal Reserve, assumed a dominant role in managing economic cycles, wielding tools that shaped everything from employment to asset prices. The promise of stability was replaced by a new era of volatility. Critics of the fiat system argue that it fosters irresponsible fiscal behavior and sows the seeds of systemic risk. Advocates contend that it provides essential flexibility in responding to economic crises. Both perspectives hold truths. What is undeniable is that the 1971 decision marked a turning point, one whose effects continue to reverberate through every corner of the global economy. Today, debates rage over whether a return to some form of gold standard is feasible or desirable. The logistical challenges are immense. The gold reserves that once underpinned the system are no longer sufficient, and international consensus is elusive. Moreover, the sheer scale and complexity of modern financial systems dwarf those of the post-war era. Yet the allure of a more disciplined monetary framework persists, particularly in times of economic instability. To understand our present economic landscape, one must grasp this pivotal moment in history. The closure of the gold window was not a mere technical adjustment. It was the quiet birth of a new world, one where money is ultimately a matter of trust, and where that trust is more fragile, more malleable, and more consequential than ever before. The story of 1971 is not just a chapter in economic history, it is the foundation of the world we inhabit today. And as we navigate its complexities, it is worth remembering that the river of money, once diverted, can carve paths both wondrous and perilous. The golden signal. How one decision unleashed a surge that changed the financial world. Imagine a world where the very foundation of money is suddenly, almost silently removed, where the unspoken agreement that has underpinned decades of global finance evaporates overnight. This is not the stuff of fiction. It happened, and the signal of this seismic shift came in the form of an ancient, gleaming metal. The moment the United States suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold, something profound was unleashed. Gold, long held static in value by artificial constraints, was suddenly free to express its true worth in the marketplace. The result was a breathtaking surge, nearly a 1,000% increase in its price relative to the dollar. Why did this happen? The forces behind it are both deeply rational and inherently psychological. First, central banks and institutional investors, realizing that their vast holdings of dollars were no longer equivalent to claims on real gold, scrambled to rebalance their portfolios. They needed to secure tangible value in a world that had just become far more uncertain. Second, gold has always held a unique allure during times of upheaval. When trust in the paper currency wavers, especially when a president resets the very architecture of global trade and finance, gold becomes a beacon of security. In that sense, the dramatic rise in gold's price was not merely a market correction. It was a collective human response to the deep instinctual need for stability. Now, interpretations of this surge vary. To some economists, this was the clearest signal that fiat money, unbacked by any finite resource, begins to erode in value the moment it is decoupled from scarcity. Others argue that the Bretton Woods system itself was the distortion, an unnatural bottleneck that prevented gold from reflecting true market dynamics. They note that inflation existed even during the heyday of Bretton Woods, one reason foreign governments increasingly preferred gold over dollars, and why Nixon ultimately took the step he did. For nearly 3 decades, gold's price had been unnaturally stable, giving many a false sense of monetary solidity. The price explosion post-1971 revealed just how suppressed this market had been. Initially, Nixon's bold move was well received at home. Markets rallied. Confidence seemed intact. But beneath the surface, trouble brewed. Oil producers, wary of accepting a currency no longer backed by gold, responded with sharp price hikes. Unlike gold, oil is a consumable necessity, its value tied to the real-world demands of industry and society. The impact was immediate and global. Inflation rippled outward, touching not just fuel, but every good and service connected to energy, which was virtually all of them. The ripple became a wave when, a few years later, America repealed its long-standing ban on private gold ownership. Pent-up demand surged into the market, driving gold prices to unprecedented highs. Meanwhile, the money supply in the U.S. expanded rapidly. While it had doubled in the 1960s, it would nearly triple in the following decade. More money in circulation theoretically offers opportunities, enabling purchases, spurring investment, empowering entrepreneurs, and indeed, a controlled level of inflation can even benefit the broader economy by encouraging the flow of wealth rather than its hoarding. But the super wealthy, as history shows, are adept at adapting. They shifted strategies, reinvesting in diverse asset classes to preserve and expand their fortunes even in an inflationary environment. Thus, a new era of financial behavior was born, one where the velocity of money, the psychology of investment, and the dynamics of wealth distribution would evolve in ways few could have foreseen. The suspension of gold convertibility wasn't just a policy change, it was the catalyst for a profound transformation in how the world understands and navigates value itself. 4. Beyond the gold curtain, the true forces that reshaped our modern economy, it is tempting, so very tempting, to imagine that one dramatic decision, the severing of gold convertibility, set the stage for everything that feels broken in today's economy. The allure of a single turning point is powerful. It simplifies a complex story. But if you allow your gaze to soften, to take in the broader canvas of history, you will begin to see that other forces were quietly at play, reshaping the financial landscape beneath our feet. As the 1970s unfolded, something curious happened. Gross domestic product didn't falter, it soared. Global trade, freed from the rigid scaffolding of Bretton Woods, expanded with surprising vigor. New technologies emerged, compounding growth and birthing modern titans of industry. With these fresh opportunities, fortunes were made, not merely because the gold window had closed, but because a new, interconnected world was taking form. Naturally, this surge in global commerce widened the gap between those at the top and those still climbing, increasing inequality. Yet paradoxically, those lower on the ladder were still advancing, just not as quickly. The decoupling from gold in this light did not chain the poor to deeper poverty. Rather, it unshackled governments from outdated constraints, allowing them to guide economies with greater flexibility. The seeds of today's widening inequality were sown not in that single moment of 1971, but more profoundly in the ideological shifts that swept through the 1980s. Under the banners of leaders like Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, new policies emerged, lowering top income and capital gains taxes, deregulating industries, privatizing public assets, suppressing unions, and easing the grip of antitrust enforcement. These moves did far more to tilt the scales of wealth and power than gold convertibility ever had. Consider this. The last successful antitrust breakup by the U.S. Federal Trade Commission occurred in 1982. Since then, corporate giants have not only grown larger, but more dominant, their tentacles reaching deeper into everyday life. Even AT&T, once fractured into 8 separate companies, has largely recombined, while we, the public, have become more dependent on their services than ever before. If one examines the data with a critical eye, The inflection point where inequality truly accelerates does not neatly align with 1971. It emerges more clearly in the early 1980s. Yet, humans are pattern-seeking creatures. With enough distance and a bold red arrow drawn across a chosen year, we will see whatever story we wish to believe. The truth, however, is richer and more hypnotic, an intricate dance of policy, technology, and human ambition unfolding across decades. The illusion of the curve. Why economic charts mislead more than they reveal. It is easy to be captivated by the sweeping arcs of economic charts, especially those that seem to bend sharply around the 1970s, as if the entire fate of our modern world pivoted in that singular decade. But beneath the seductive curves lies a deeper truth, one rooted less in historical upheaval and more in the quiet certainty of mathematics. Most economic data you encounter today shares two defining traits. It reflects exponential growth, and its consistent collection began in the aftermath of the Second World War. The consequence is inevitable. Like all data shaped by the forces of compounding, these charts will naturally form the iconic hockey stick pattern, with the 1970s emerging as a mathematical inflection point, not necessarily an economic cataclysm. This phenomenon is often seized upon by a vast industry built on selling the dream of gold as a panacea for all that ails our modern economy. Gold, like stocks or cryptocurrencies, is a colossal asset class, one that thrives on narratives and hype to fuel demand. Yet, to dismiss the abandonment of the gold standard as meaningless would be folly. In truth, it was akin to removing the training wheels from our economic engine. This newfound freedom allowed us to accelerate growth in ways that a rigid gold-backed system never could have supported. But with that freedom came the liberty to err, to indulge in excesses and vulnerabilities that would soon be exploited. Companies were poised to capitalize on these shifts, and few did so with more precision than Walmart, an entity that would master the delicate art of privatizing profits while socializing the costs. If you found this perspective illuminating, I invite you to continue this journey of understanding. Like, share, and subscribe to this channel, and together, let us unravel the unseen threads of history that continue to shape our world.